Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Xojo webinar. I'm Paul Lefevre, the Xojo Developer Evangelist, and our topic this time is Power User IDE Tips. So for the next half hour or so, we're going to take a look at Xojo. Yep, we're going to just jump right into Xojo, not really any slides to speak of today, and go through some stuff, and hopefully you'll pick up a few tips. So here we are. I have Xojo open. I have the Eddie's Electronics project open so that I can have something with some stuff as I move around to show people things. So one of the first things I want to show people is if you're working on a laptop or something with a smaller screen, you may find that you want to get rid of the toolbar to free up some space. So you can actually hide the toolbar and get some more screen real estate that way. And that's a little hidden up there, so I wanted to just point that out to people. A lot of developers tend to work on laptops. I generally work on a desktop myself, but I do have a laptop for when I'm mobile, and it does have a tiny screen, so this is handy. On Mac, you can also go to full screen, which click the green button there, and that kind of even runs it in more of a full screen mode, hiding menu bars and stuff like that. I don't generally like that Mac setup, but I know some people, again, on laptops find that pretty handy, so you can do that. If you are working on a desktop, though, and have lots of screen space, the opposite tip is you can actually have two workspace windows or two or more workspace windows open. So right now I have the main workspace window open. It shows the Eddie's Electronics project. But I could go here and pick File, New Workspace, and I can have a second window open that shows the same project. So say if I had two displays, I could drag this one over to another display, and I could be more easily see two things at the same time, maybe have some other source code displayed where I'm working on a different method. So again, something that might be more productive for when you're actually sitting at a desk and have multiple displays hooked up. All right, so that's just some initial high-level stuff on the overall workspace part of Xojo. Now, I'm just going to go through the various areas and point out some things that maybe you use or haven't heard of yet. So as you should know, over here on the right-hand side, we have the library and the inspector. Right now, the inspector is showing for the app that is selected. And these share the same space on the screen. So you have to hit the buttons here to jump between them. You can also use the keyboard shortcuts, Command-L, Command-I, or Control on Windows or Linux to jump between them. But if you really want to have both of these on the screen at the same time, you can also go to your preferences, and it's the very first preference here, and you can tell them to display as floating palettes. And then you can get them here as palettes that kind of float here to the side. So you could have them, again, on a separate screen, or you could just keep them displayed up like this, and then shrink the main workspace window so that both of them are visible here at once. Whatever works for you. But I know some people like to do this, and this is, again, not something I see a lot of people do because you don't always notice that you can make that change. Personally, I do kind of like them in the project window. But these are tips, so try them out and see what works for you in your workflow. Now, if you're looking at the library, by default, when you start Xojo, it just has a bunch of icons that are all grouped together like this. And then as you hover over them, you can see on the bottom here, this area changes to give you a description. Once you get familiar with things, you can actually just drag that down and hide that so you don't see that anymore. But you can also change the way stuff is shown here. So I tend to, as I had here, turn on the group banners that show the grouping of things. And I'll often go with these small icons and labels for this sort of look for the controls. It does involve a bit more scrolling, but personally I can find this a little easier to grab what I want. But there are quite a few different options here, so I encourage you to play around with the different things, see if you find something that might work a little better for how you want to use the library. And don't forget there's a filter up here, so you can type in something and it'll reduce that down to what control names match what you typed. And also, if you have something selected here, I can just start typing. So say here, I start typing slider. You can see that it popped up to show you the text, and it immediately selected the item here. So that can be another quick way to find something in the list without even having to go to the filter. Just click on something and then start typing its name, and it'll automatically get selected for you. Looking at the inspector, let's select something here that's got a little more meat on it. So I first want to remind people that there's a tab at the top of the inspector. Some people forget about this. This is what we call the advanced tab. Looks like a gear, and you can click it, and various controls and objects will have things here. And these are generally the advanced settings, the ones that are not as commonly used or changed to keep this one a little more focused with the items that you work with a lot. So do remember this is here, and click it to make sure you see all the properties available to what you're looking at. You can see they all have different things in here. And if I go back to the inspector for the window to show its properties, you can see here on the title, this is using a string constant. You can see it's prefixed with the pound sign. And what this is actually doing is referring to a module called strings, and then a constant in there called customer info. And I have in that module we can find customer info right here. You can see that it has this set up for a variety of languages. And right now it's pulling English text out of there to display right here in the title bar. But if I built for different languages, or it was run on a computer with a different language set, I should say, it will pull in the appropriate text and display it there. So a handy way to have your constants change dynamically based on language. And then you can also do that with Boolean properties. And you can right-click on a Boolean property, and you can choose assign constant here. And that will let you type in a constant similar. I don't have one set up right now, but you could create, a module with some Boolean constants on there and refer to it the same way that you refer to this one, and then it will look up the value. You can right-click again to remove it. And that feature's a little hidden because you actually have to right-click on the switch here. It's not exposed in any other way. All right, so let's move on to the Navigator. So here on the left-hand side, we have the Navigator for this project. And one of the first things I want to point out is the use of folders on this project. So you can see right now I have this project grouped into 3 folders. I've got all my user interface stuff in a folder, and all the graphics are in its own folder, and then database stuff just has a single database class. But it makes for good grouping. I'll often see projects where kind of the project items are just kind of thrown in the big list here and without any sort of organization. And I don't like to work that way. I like to have my stuff grouped. It makes it a little easier for me to follow. But one of the neat things you can do with folder groupings is, I had that strings module open in a tab, but I could come and right-click on the folder itself, and I can open that in a tab. So then I could still be here and looking at something, but here on this tab, I'll see just the project items that are related to that folder, which might be a set of common functionality that you work on together. And then you can just have that grouped here, and it kind of keeps your project a little more focused. You don't have to see everything in the project. So that's a great reason to make use of folders. If you happen to have a ton of stuff open in the Navigator and things are expanded, and you're way down and you get a bunch of different things happen to be expanded, so you get a whole kinds of stuff open up here, and you decide, I really want to just collapse everything. Well, Xojo doesn't actually have a collapse all thing, but you can do that just by coming here to contents, and when you hover over it, the hide shows up, you can just immediately hit hide and then show again, and it opens back up and everything's all collapsed for you. So kind of a good way to just kind of clean everything up in 2 quick clicks. You can see I used tabs here. Tabs are great as you start working on projects that get larger and larger. You can have multiple things open and quickly jump to them just by clicking on the tab. You can reorganize your tabs just by dragging them around. Super handy. I definitely recommend using tabs. You can also tap the lock button on a tab to prevent. Actually, it's locked by default, so generally speaking, that's probably just how you want to leave it. If you unlock it, it will allow Xojo to attempt to replace an item in a tab for you automatically, depending on your workflow. But I think most people prefer to just leave things locked and have it set to what they want to work on. And one common technique is to always use the first tab as essentially your project list, and then just send stuff over to other tabs that you're working on. So you can always come back here to the first tab and kind of see everything that you need. There's also a filter here, though. So if I wanted to look for a particular item, rather than opening up all the folders and everything that's contained within, I can just type the name up here, and quickly I'll just see the specific items that have that in its name. And then when I click on it, if the tab is open, it'll jump me to it, or it'll display it. So the filter is a bit of an underused feature. You can just click the X to clear it, and it'll show you also right where it is. And as you work around in various things, let's see if I can get something up here. So go to the About window, and I go to the Invoice window. You can use the back button and the forward buttons to jump between the things you're working on in the tab. These buttons are tab specific. It's not going to jump you to other tabs that you're working on. It's specific to what you've done in the tab. But if there's just a few quick things that you're flipping between, that can be kind of a handy way to navigate between them rapidly. Obviously, as you get more and more stuff, that becomes less useful. But for just a small number of things, it's a good way to jump around the items you're working on. Another thing you can do, let's close these tabs, open the user interface one up again. Say there's something here and you want to just make this tab focus on that exclusively. You can just double click on it. So say I come here to the About window, I can just double click on the About window. Oops, I guess I have to do it from this tab. Yeah, there it is. So if I double click on it, you can see that it now replaced the whole project name here with just the About window. So this is what we call drilling into the project item. If I click the drop down, you can get back to the main project just by clicking it here, or you could click the little back symbol here. And this, again, provides a way for you to just focus on one particular thing without having everything else kind of also appearing next to you and maybe distracting you. And that's done by double clicking on the item. There is a preference that you can set so that I think double clicking will open the item in a new tab instead, but I prefer to leave it like this and not use the right click open in tab to open items I want in their own tabs. One thing you can do here in the Navigator is you can actually multi-select things that you might not think you could multi-select. So here I can multi-select a bunch of methods. And if I wanted, this will obviously break this particular project, but I could just drag them into another project item, boom, just like that, and they're now here. So it can be pretty useful for refactoring. You just got to drag and drop the stuff you want, which I always like. And of course, you can also drag things around to reorder them in the project list itself so that it has the order and the organization that fits how you're working. And the multi-select works for anything in the Navigator, so I can multi-select multiple project items if I wanted to drag them around and put them in new folders or organize them differently. And you can multi-select, the methods like I showed or properties or whatever is displayed there. In the project window here, there is a go to location feature. So if you actually know the exact name of what you want to work on, you can use go to location and you can start typing with autocomplete and then find the one you want and hit go, and it'll just jump right there for you with the item selected. So you don't have to remember, all right, was that in the chart folder that's in the user interface folder, or is that somewhere else? And you can just bring it up. All right, and the last thing I want to mention here with the Navigator, and also related a bit to the inspector, is here in the preferences. At the very bottom, there's a little checkbox for use large font, which makes the text here a little bit bigger, which you may like. I often do turn that on. At least in my main user account, it is on. And, so if your eyes are starting to age and you want some stuff a little bigger, flip that setting on. All right, let's move on here to the layout editor. So layout editor, that's where you're going to drag and drop controls, do your layout, all the usual stuff. But I wanted to point out in the event handler window, when you go to add events, you can actually also multi-select in this window and add a bunch of events all at once, which can be pretty handy again. If you're starting something and you're like, all right, I know I need these 4 events, well, boom, just add them all at once immediately. Don't, add one at a time and keep going back to that window. You can also just start typing to have it jump to a certain part of the list to make it a little faster to find what you want. And you might notice when you're moving the mouse around in the layout editor, you get this little pencil icon with a circle that kind of appears in the corner. Now, if you've never bothered to click it, that just shows the default value pop up. And it also can appear if the item is selected, you just press return on the item, it'll pop up. And it has a third way, which is the pencil icon here in the command bar. And I'll do the same thing. They bring up what the default property is for the control. In the case of something like a text field, it's the actual text. And you can just use this real quick to type something in without having to necessarily go to the inspector and find that property in its location and type something there. And various controls have different default properties. Buttons, have their caption and whatnot. And the other thing that I don't see a lot of people use that can be handy when you're doing your layouts is this button up here is the measurement tool. And with that turned on, as you hover around, you get a bunch of lines and numbers showing up to tell you where things are positioned on the layout. And you can multi-select so that it can tell you overall groupings and size of things. So again, pretty handy for when you're making sure your layouts are all lining up the way you want. Probably don't want to leave that on all the time, but occasionally it can be a good idea to turn that on and just double check your layout positions. All right, let's move on to the code editor. So one of the things you can do in the code editor, a relatively new feature, is a button up here that shows line numbers. Obviously, the line numbers don't do anything, but they can be handy for giving you an idea of actually, how long your method is, in case someone asks. But it's also good if you need to refer to something when you're showing people some code. You can say, hey, well, look at line 14. That's a lot easier for someone to eyeball than to say, well, find the invoice record set and look at the move next method on it there. You got to kind of scan all the text to jump there. So pretty handy there. And that is set kind of across the project. So you turn it on once and there you go. You're going to be seeing that everywhere. I also recommend in the code editor that you switch to a good monospace font. Right now, I'm using a font called Source Code Pro from Adobe, but I really recommend this over going with just a generic system font that I think Xojo tends to use by default. So if you go to the coding preferences, oh no, on this account I'm actually using Menlo. I think my main user account is Source Code Pro. Menlo's a monospace font, I believe it's built into macOS. But you can pick any font you want. Definitely stick with a monospace font. Don't use something really funky like a script font or something like that. You can tweak the size and make a few other settings here. And you can also actually have themes, which means each of the syntax things here you can tweak for your color preferences. And then once you have one you like, you can actually export it so you can reload it at other times. And there's a website called at libertyapp.com/Xojo themes that has a few themes available already pre-made. So I'm going to load one here. I downloaded their Space Gray theme. And you can see it tweaks the text and whatnot. The darker background color here. Much smaller font than I like. And then, if you don't like something, you just hit reset and it'll go back to the original settings. If you look at this code, you're going to notice the particular styling it has with the essentially the uppercase of the keywords. So if I type something here, that's all lowercase. You can select code and then pick this standardized format option, and it applies the general standard formatting that you tend to see for Xojo type code. Not everyone likes this general type of syntax, but if you do work with this, you can select the code and have it do that for you. You can also, in the preferences here, tell it to apply that automatically. So if I turn this on, apply after ending the line. As soon as I press return, the standardized format's applied to the line, which is handy. And as you can see in the code editor here, as I'm moving around on the left-hand side, you can see these indicators highlighting essentially the block of code that the mouse cursor is in. And that's kind of neat from a visual perspective, kind of tells you where the block of code starts and ends. But you can also, if you want to just get it out of the way, click the indicator right next to it, and that block of code is hidden from you. It's not removed or anything like that. It's just hidden in the code editor here so that, again, maybe it doesn't distract you as much, lets you focus on the code that you're actually working on. Obviously, that would be handier perhaps with longer methods. Personally, I try to keep methods relatively short, so I don't use the code folding, as that's called, all that often, but I do know a lot of people really like it, to point it out that it's there. Going back here to when I was typing in some code, right here, if I hold down the Shift key when I press return, Xojo's going to fill in for you the rest of the block information. So it automatically filled in the then and the end if for me and put the cursor in the middle where I can then put my own code that goes in that code block. I use that Shift return all the time to autocomplete, particularly if statements, but it also works with loops and other things that are blocks, select case, that sort of stuff. So very handy. After all, if you don't type it, there's no chance of you actually making a typo, right? In the code editor, I can right click on a method name here. And this is a method that is part of the project. So find customers by ID. So I can right click on that and I can go click here to the go to option. And it'll jump to that part of the project where I can then look at that method. So a good way to quickly find what you're looking for without having to do a search or anything like that. And you can also right click on built-in Xojo things. So here the SQL select method here, I can click on that and I can tap the help and it will jump to the help page for that particular thing. So another fast way to look that up. And if I happen to be looking at code for something that has a layout and I want to take a gander at the layout, well, you can see this particular window has quite a bunch of controls and events and methods. So with the method down here, I can't even see the window anymore. So I'd have to scroll up if I wanted to select it to show it. But alternatively, you can just use this little button here in the command bar to jump to the layout, take a peek at it, do what you want, and then I can click the code button here to jump back to the code I was looking at. So a fast way to flip between those two things without having to do any Navigator scrolling or anything like that. In the code editor, if you select some code, right click on it, you can see down here towards the bottom of the menu, there's all these refactoring options that you can take advantage of. These can wrap, they will just instantly wrap your selected code in the thing that's identified here. So say you didn't want that line of code to run for some reason, you could just do an if false on it. You could change it to be, oh, actually I want that code to run only on Mac. You could do something like that. I could also do something here where I start to type a method name. Now this method doesn't exist yet, but I'm like, just coding. I'm like, all right, I need to write this method here. So I'm just going to type it here in the code. I can then select it and click define missing method. And this adds that method right here to the list for me, filling in the parameter and stuff so I don't forget about it later. So definitely check out the things that are in there. They may make you more efficient. And a one that I tend to use a lot is you right click the code here and you can pick convert to method. And that gives you a little thing here where I can say, give it a name, fill in any parameters I want. And then when I click it, that chunk of code is removed, replaced with the function name. And then here there's a function name that has that code added to it. So a nice little refactoring thing there that, again, can help make you more efficient. Everybody already knows about autocomplete, so I'm not going to talk about that too much, just to remind people that it's there. And take advantage of it. Press that tab key whenever you see some grayed out text or the ellipses and take a look at what's there. And, I think it encourages you to have better descriptions for your objects and your methods and whatnot, because you no longer have the fear of typos, essentially, because you can rely on autocomplete to find that and fill it in for you. So you don't try to take shortcuts by using abbreviations and other things that might make your code harder to read. As you hover through the code editor, take a look at the bottom here in the what we call the syntax help area. And this is going to show data types, sometimes some help text. If I can get something here that the full method signature for something that you hover over it so you can see what it actually takes as a parameter and what it returns as a value, that sort of thing. So you can glance down there real quick. If you're adding a new method, you can type the whole thing here. On one line, and when you press return, it's split apart and fills in the inspector for you, so you don't have to type one thing at a time and tab between it. Great speed saver there. That also works with properties. And you can go hog wild here. Whoops. I guess I should have tried private to see if that changed. So let's do that. So that was able to change the scope as well. I thought you could do a default property in there. All right, going back here. The gutter here on the left where the line numbers are currently showing, you can see these dashes next to thing. That's what you can click on, single click on to set breakpoints, which of course are used with the debugger. But you can also, what is it? Option click, I believe. So if I option click here, there's a little different indicator here. This sets a bookmark. So if you've got portion of code that you want to refer to again later, you can tag it with a bookmark, and then you can go to the project menu here, project menu, and then go to the bookmarks section, and you can hit show all, and then down in the results you'll get a list of all the bookmarks, and then you can click on one just as usual, and it'll jump right back to that part of the code and put the cursor there for you. And you can have both a breakpoint and a bookmark set on the same line. The bookmark indicator will just appear as red instead. And then remember, there's a clear all for both of these up here, which you may find useful if you were trying to debug something tricky and were setting breakpoints willy-nilly all throughout your project, and then you finally find and fix the problem. You can just go, all right, let's just turn off all these breakpoints because I don't need them all, and I don't want to find where I set them all and remove them one at a time. Speaking of the panel area down here that shows the find window, the errors area, and then the message box. First thing is just to remind people, if you want to get rid of this, you just click it again, and it goes away. So a second click makes it go away. There's also a setting here in, I think it's in the debugger. You can tell Xojo to hide this panel whenever you run your project, really because it's not too useful when you're using the debugger. So it can be handy to just have that go away when the project runs. It's up to you if you want to turn that on or not. Finding has a few options here you may never bother to look at, but you've got the first option, which is a global project search, and then you've got two others which will search just a specific item that's selected and its subclasses, and then one that'll just search the code that's displayed up on the screen rather than the whole project. And then you've got a few other options for how things are matched. So you can do some clever searching and replacing using that stuff. Not much to say about the errors, except that, that's where your compile errors are going to show up. I bet this project is starting to get quite a few as we're making a mess of things. But your compile errors show up, and as you click on them, it's going to take you to the part of the code in error, and also show you this fun little bug icon off to the side. And then the last one, the messages tab, if you use the system.debug log, the output will appear here. And again, that's useful for logging. Obviously, the debugger is a great way to find values and see how your code is running, stepping through it line by line and whatnot. But sometimes you do need to log, maybe because it's dealing with user interface stuff that would be affected by constantly switching back to the debugger. or just stuff that is happening automatically behind the scenes, and you don't really want to have to step through it to figure stuff out. So you can take advantage of the debug log and the message log output area here for that. All right, let's see here. Yeah, I used my tip there to collapse everything. I'm only briefly going to mention here, just as a reminder, that about the build automation and IDE scripting that is built into Xojo. So if I expand one of the build targets here, you can see there's a build item, and then this particular one has a copy files build script. It runs after the project is built, and in this case, it's copying the database file from its own folder to be into the resources folder of the app itself. And you can have separate ones for each of the build types. Copy files is a common one that people use, but you can also have scripts. You can have your own script that's embedded in here, or you can refer to a script that's been saved to a file. Uses for this include, maybe having some sort of system shell script that is running code signing commands and some other stuff against your app after it's built. So you can have Xojo kind of call that stuff for you automatically. Lots of powerful things you can do there. You can kind of build almost a fully automatic build system by taking advantage of IDE scripting. I have done a separate webinar on that, so I'm not going to really go into that here because that's a pretty lengthy topic. But I will point out also, I don't have any here right now, but if you do put your own scripts into a scripts folder in your project or in the Xojo installation folder, they'll show up here, and you can just run them by clicking on them. So if you have common scripts for code formatting or whatever is appropriate, you can easily access them there. Just copy them into your scripts folder. All right. Since that's broken, I'm going to close it and reopen it so that it's running, so that I can actually show you the debugger. So let's open up the debugger here and set a breakpoint. So, of course, when you run your project and it hits line of code where you have a breakpoint set, you drop into the debugger with that line of code highlighted, and you can use the command bar options here to step through the code one line at a time, step into a particular method rather than just kind of stepping right over it into the next line. And you can also step out of a method if you happen to be into one, and it'll leave the method and continue chugging along. Those are less commonly used, but kind of be a quick way to move through your code. You can't type in here in this. This is read-only view of the code, so you can't modify your code while Xojo is running, or at least you can't modify it to change the behavior of the running app. You can, however, click the little pencil icon here to have Xojo switch to the actual code editor, where you then can make changes to your code while it is running, but these changes won't take effect until you run the next time. If you're in the debugger for simple data types, integer, string, and stuff like that, you can actually click on the value and change it right in the debugger, which probably runs a strong risk of breaking your code when its values change in large ways that maybe aren't expected. But that also might be a good way for you to test something or quickly get something to a place where it needs to be so you can test something else. So you can actually do that just by clicking on the value in there. And of course, anything that's underlined, you can click on to get in and see its properties, and depending on what it is, its contents and stuff. And sometimes people want to have a conditional break. And you can do that by using the break keyword. You just type it like that. So you can put an if statement around something and then just call the break command. And this will immediately drop you into the debugger. So it's handy if you're in a loop or something like that and you want to wait for a specific condition before the debugger comes up. That's better than, hitting, continue or stepping through the loop a bunch of times and having your mousey finger break off. So definitely take advantage of the break command so you can conditionally drop into the debugger. And I've done different webinars on this before, but I do want to remind people to take advantage of the remote debugger, which you can configure here in the preferences. And you can add different hosts. So you put the remote debugging stub app that's included with Xojo on the machine you want to debug onto. And then you can add it here to connect to it. So here you can see I have a Raspberry Pi set up. And when it's running the remote debugging app, I can run an app here from my Mac in Xojo, build it for the Pi, ship it over, and then test it on the Pi, and all the debugging will be done on the Mac. Super handy. You can go from Mac to Windows, Windows to Mac, Mac to Pi, Mac to Linux. All combinations. So very handy to jump between the different type of computers and do some testing without having to physically necessarily have Xojo on every one of those installations. All right, some general project stuff I want to point out. If you have a Xojo desktop license, web license, iOS license, or preferably Xojo Pro, you'll have available to you in the Save window the option to save your project as a Xojo project format. If you haven't done that, probably should really strongly consider that for your own projects. Right now, this project here is what's in the binary project format, which is essentially, it's a proprietary binary file. All the project contents are in this single file, which is, kind of handy for distribution and whatnot. But Xojo project will save that project as a bunch of files. So here, if I guess I can just save it right back in that folder. And you can see here that it now has everything is its own file. So each project item that's in the project is now saved as its own file in the file system, which is incredibly necessary if you're working with any sort of source control system, such as Subversion or Git or whatnot. It's just a better way to ensure the integrity of your code. You can more easily track changes in things. You can, because they're all text files, they can be opened up using a text editor if that was necessary. So I highly recommended you work with the project format in most situations. In the project window here, there's an option to analyze project. And this essentially does a compile of your project. Doesn't do a build or anything like that. It just runs through a full compile, but also runs through a few extra things, such as some warnings and stuff. And it can be handy to do that. This can flag usage of things that, for example, have been deprecated and tell you what the replacement is, which you might want to clean up so that your code remains compatible with future versions of Xojo. It can tell you where you have unused variables, in this case, method parameters and stuff like that. You don't always have to clean up every warning, but sometimes it's handy to know about them. And you can actually see the warnings. It can be flagged. And if there's some that you don't care about, you can uncheck them here so that they don't get flagged. But Analyze project can be handy for that. When you are debugging, if an exception occurs, you drop into the debugger automatically with the line of code that triggered the exception highlighted. And that happens even if your exception is caught in a try-catch, for example. So if you want to avoid that debugger happening, a debugger appearing when that happens, you can use a pragma. And you can say, all right, for this method or this block of code here, don't break on exceptions anymore. And then you could turn it back to its setting at the end. You can go back to default. so that it just switches to whatever you happen to have set here. Or you could specifically turn it on if you wanted. But that can be handy, make your debugging a little easier. Also on the preferences, I want to point out that you can tweak all the shortcuts for everything. So, if you find something in here that doesn't have a shortcut that you use a lot, you can add one. You can change a shortcut if you don't like it. They're all listed here, and you can tweak things and change what you want. So do take advantage of that if you like your keyboard shortcuts. And in the file menu, there is an option here called Collect Project Items, which essentially pulls everything referred to by the project right alongside the project. So this is handy if you have, shared project items or other things that you're using that are scattered about and might make it more challenging for you to package everything up to send to someone else to look at or something like that, or even maybe to submit to feedback. So you can use Collect Project Items to kind of pull that stuff all together for you, and then you can resave the project and you'll have everything in one place you can zip up and send along. And if you go to New Project, whenever you create a new project, you get the default options here, but there's also this template option here that just has a couple console type things here, but you can put whatever you want here. So if you always start a desktop project with some built-in libraries that you use in all your projects, you can create your own template and then just come here and choose it, Paul's default desktop template. And I could come here and I could pick that. And then when I open the project, it would come with all that stuff in the project already. I wouldn't have to copy and paste it from something else or set it up or do any of that stuff. And if you actually wanted to totally change the default template for every desktop project, you can even do that just by using the name default desktop project, I believe it is. That you can look that up in the user guide. And then that template will be used whenever you pick desktop from the menu there. So, and if you go to, where do I have my Xojo installation? Here it is. So you can see here, right here's the project template. So you can just drag your project files here. These do need to be binary project format, but you can just drop whatever you want in here and they'll show up in that new project chooser window. All right, and the last thing I want to remind people about is the profiler, which you can flip on here. And then when you run your project, Xojo will now be tracking how long it takes for things to happen. And so you just use it as you normally would and do stuff. And then when your project terminates, and it has to terminate normally with a regular quit. It can't crash or anything like that. You'll get a new entry here of profile data. And you can run it multiple times and get multiple entries here so you can have them for comparison. And you can see, what methods were called, how long, how many times they were called, how long they took to run. So if you do need to analyze your project to, tweak its performance, this can kind of tell you what areas you might want to focus on first. I don't recommend people play around with the profiler right away. Generally once your app's pretty stable and things are working well and you get to the end is when you want to consider optimization and you can fire up the profiler. You can also turn on the profiler for built apps, and this will save a text file alongside the app that your customer could send to you for you to analyze. And that can be handy if, a particular customer is having an issue that you can't replicate. All right, I think that's all the power user tips I wanted to cover today. I'm sure there are others that I've missed that maybe you know about. Feel free to send them my way. Maybe we can get them in a blog post or something else. You can always grab the latest version of Xojo at xojo.com/download. And always do that. Grab that, read the release notes, see if it's got some stuff that you want to be taking advantage of. Don't forget, we have a free introduction to programming book at xojo.com/learn, which is a great way for those looking to just get into programming to kind of start. The Xojo forum is a great place to ask questions or just search for answers. And the Xojo Dev Center at developer.xojo.com has full documentation, including the user guide, quick starts and tutorials and videos and everything else you might imagine. And my contact information, reach me at paul@xojo.com. Again, if you have other tips or things you'd like me to highlight in some way, feel free to send them my way. That wraps everything up for today's webinar. Thank you for attending. Have a great day.